Hello, welcome to my website, Exploring the States of Matter. Currently, we are starting on the homepage of my website. As we scroll down, the first section is just a little bit about me. My name is Cierra Ballew, and I'm a second grade teacher for Whitfield County Schools. Also, just talks about my SLP and how it is focused on the standard for second grade that covers states of matter. The next section goes a little bit more in depth. It mentions the class that I worked on this SLP throughout, and it also really details that standard S2P1, obtain, evaluate, and communicate information about the properties of matter and changes that occur in objects. I've taught first and second grade for my entire 7 years so far, and so properties of matter is covered in both of those grades, and I thought I knew a lot about the resources and the activities and that I had done what there was to do, but I was so wrong, and there's so many resources and activities that I found throughout this SLP that I plan to use in my future years of teaching. The next section is the standards that are covered or touched on throughout this SLP in some way or on some project or assignment that I completed. So, of course, we have our science standard on the properties of matter and the 3 sub-standards that go along with that. There's a math standard that's touched on in my 5E lesson plan, and then some ELA standards that are covered through different read-alouds and collaborative conversations that students will have. The next section is where my video overview is going to go. So now if we go back up to the top, we can click on the next tab, which is theory. So at the beginning of this page, I'll talk a little bit about how we research different theories in this class, and I have my assignment that has many different learning theories on it, but then I also really go into the theory that I was most focused on throughout this semester, which was environmental education. I think that many of the science standards obviously lend themselves well to environmental education because science is mostly about life and the outdoors and things that come naturally in our world, or use natural resources, and so this was really easy to connect to the states of matter, and I just think anytime we can get students outside in the sun and interacting with the environment around them, the better. So I've included a few pictures that show students interacting with the environment. Also detailed from our learning theories assignment the benefits of environmental education, the challenges, and then what the classroom setup would look like. The benefits are great in ways that they allow students to connect to the community around them and their past experience, and it really engages them, which hopefully will allow them to better remember the content later. Also, the challenges, which really just revolve around having proper professional development on what environmental education is and what requirements in the lessons you would need to include for a lesson to be using environmental education. And then also just having the adequate resources and knowing planning ahead of time in your science lessons to know what you wanted to do and how you were going to incorporate environmental education. And then the classroom setup, obviously they would need to be outside. They would need to have an opportunity to be interacting with these materials in the real world. The next section is resources informing my understanding of environmental education. When I was first researching all of the learning theories, I came across this video, and it's told in the point of view of students. I just thought it was really powerful, and I wanted to include it here for others to be able to look at if they were interested in that learning theory. It's a really great video, and it's interesting to hear these students' stories. And then the next section is resources that can be used to teach environmental education. So to the left, there is an environmental education activity guide. And this is great because they have already planned environmental education activities from pre-K to 8th grade. They have many different activities. It tells you exactly what you need, what standards they cover. So this is something I hope to add to my classroom next year to be better prepared to use that learning theory. The next resource is a resource actually for students and for teaching about air pollution. In my classroom, we have a pet chameleon, which you may have seen on the homepage. And this is a book, which you can click the button here to read it. Why is Cocoa Orange? And it merges the ideas of chameleons and how they change their color, and then the air pollution and what that does. And so that ties in with matter and also the environment. The next tab that we're going to look at is classroom application. So in this tab of my website, it's split into two parts. The first part is content knowledge, so just showing throughout this course how we have used what we know to research the content that we are I have been talking about on this website, which is States of Matter. So there are two ways that I have done that. First, through our NTSA article review, talking about the misconceptions about plant growth, and it talks about the plant's needs, which we would talk about how there's air, there's water, and there's soil, so solid, liquids, and gases, and then some of the misconceptions that come along with that. And then secondly, there's our assignment on the content resource review, which I did mine on States of Matter through Science Trek. And this was a really interesting artifact. We were able to explore this resource, look at the states of matter. It also talked a lot about misconceptions that students have. There was a section for that. And I think that knowing what students find confusing is always beneficial when planning for future lessons. And then the next part is the pedagogical knowledge. And in both of these activities, I've included a read aloud. I think read alouds are also really important in the classroom, and there was one that went with each lesson. So the first one, the read aloud, is Sneezy the Snowman, and this is my 5E lesson plan. It is an inquiry-based lesson where students are introduced to Sneezy and some of the problems he's having. He's too cold, and when he tries to warm up, he melts, and the students have to put him back together again. But we also look at students having the opportunity to interact with ice, with a solid, and add their body heat and see what happens and why that happens. And then the second one is Bartholomew and the oobleck. And so for this SLP, we were asked to create some teaching activities. So the first one that I created was also an inquiry-based lesson where teacher gives students pre-made oobleck. This would be after they've already talked about the properties of each state of matter. And the students can interact with the oobleck for a certain amount of time, and then they have a discussion on what property of matter they believe the oobleck is. And the second activity is a post-assessment, or could be used as a pre-assessment as well, at the end of a States of Matter unit. And then I also included a video that I and my students enjoy about how to make the oobleck if you're interested in that activity. The next tab is the cultural component. So throughout this section, again, I used this book, Sneezy the Snowman, for my critical analysis of a trade book. I thought that the author of this book and the illustrator did a really good job culturally. The book is very simple. It has a very simple setting, just a few characters, but even in what they did use, I thought that they did a good job. There's some diversity in the kids, and there really was nothing that signified a certain country they were in or culture they were a part of. So I felt like it would be good for any culture. And then next is the STEM careers that I looked at for exploring states of matter. I tried to choose STEM careers that I had some experience with. And so my cousin actually was going to school to be a forensic scientist, and I always thought that would be a cool job to have. And so I thought, why not look at that for my SLP? And so forensic scientists work closely with all states of matter every day. They have to perform chemical analysis to figure out what evidence is made up or and know the makeup of each of the properties of matter to determine a substance. So I thought that was interesting to add. Second is a chemist. Before I was an education major, I was a chemistry major. So chemistry is super close to my heart. Okay, back to where we were at. Of course, chemists work with solids, liquids, and gas and manipulate them and combine them to make new substances in their jobs every day. And then next is an environmental scientist, which I thought was interesting since my learning theory was in environmental education. And these are people who are looking at the environment around us, pollution, effects that we're having on the environment, and so I thought it went hand in hand. And then lastly is the additional resources. So the first section is the science website that we explored. I have the GLOBE program, which you can click on the button to go to that website and learn more about it. Next is Journey North, which again you could click on the website. This allows you to track different migrations of animals or insects around the world. And then lastly is the solar system simulator, which allows students to look at anything in the solar system from any other place in the solar system, and they can choose the date and time. And then in my class for properties of matter, we would talk about like this picture of the globe. What's the solids, what's the liquids, what's the gases. The students could choose their own planet if they wanted to. For Journey North and the tracking migrations and seasons, we put that students could look at different animals and their life cycles, and we could discuss their needs. And then for the GLOBE program, students could, as we talk about liquids in the world around us, they could look at precipitation recently through their data visualizer. And then the last thing on my website is my PSA app review. I did mine on the app Where's My Water. It's super fun and gives anyone who may want to use the game in their classroom instructions on how to play and then how it can be used and connected to exploring states of matter. All right, thank you.